Coming up, COP28 Dubai's Instagram gets trolled by climate activists after the summit's account describes last year's outcome as an unequivocal success.
It is a plan that is led by the science.
False advertising once again.
And Hollywood takes on global warming. A new documentary film gets celebrity A-listers on board.
You know, I learned new facts about messed up statistics of what's not going right.
But first, Africa's most powerful river bursts its banks during weeks of heavy rains that have killed hundreds of people.
Cette année, la nature a libéré un peu trop d'eau par rapport à ce qu'elle libère d'habitude.
Just 2 degrees starts right now. The Congo River is one of Africa's most important waterways. It is in the west-central region of the continent, and at 220 meters is the world's deepest river. And it is full of biodiversity. There are more than 225 amphibian species and about 700 different types of fish. Although uncontrolled fishing, deforestation, and the extraction of minerals and oils are crises the Congo faces. But from late 2023 into the new year, the river has risen to its highest level in more than 60 years, surpassing 6 meters above sea level. Intense rains in the region made the Congo break its banks, which caused major flooding throughout the Democratic Republic of Congo. More than 300 people have died as a result. And tens of thousands of homes have been destroyed. And you've noticed these plastic bottles in the water. The sheer number of them, as well as other debris, has clogged many streets.
Moi, en tant qu'activiste, je ne suis pas très étonnée de voir que le niveau d'eau augmente à ce point. Ce qui m'étonne le plus, c'est de voir à quel point il n'y a aucune mesure qui est prise pour toutes ces familles qui sont en train de subir juste les effets du changement climatique qui se manifestent par de fortes inondations. Et ce qu'on remarque, ce qui nous fait le plus de peine, c'est qu'aujourd'hui on en arrive là et que des enfants, des jeunes, des familles entières sont censées subir des catastrophes auxquelles ils s'y attendaient les moins et qu'il n'y ait aucune mesure qui a été prise pour les aider à surmonter cette épreuve en fait.
Moi je crois que l'État dispose de tous les services pour pouvoir, comment dirais-je, amener les gens à occuper des sites avec un minimum de sécurité. Mais on a comme l'impression que les gens sont abandonnés à eux-mêmes, ils construisent où ils veulent, comme ils veulent.
Azerbaijan has been named this year's host of the COP29 Climate Summit. The country is a major exporter of natural gas with plans to double output by the year 2027. Baku appointed as COP29 president its ecology and natural resource minister who spent decades at the state-owned oil and gas company Sojar. The decision continues a trend of governments with deep ties to dirty industries being at the helm of UN climate talks. And last year's climate summit in the UAE triggered accusations of hypocrisy with the state-owned oil company CEO as COP28 president. The summit's official Instagram page is still active and regularly posts about the final outcome of the 2-week meetings in December. Dubai officials described the conference as having, quote, united, acted and delivered for the planet. But climate activists had their own analyses.
Delivered failure? Yes. COP has become an absolute joke, accomplishing nothing for sustainability and making sure that fossil fuels stay in use.
You delivered a wholly inadequate text that allows fossil fuel producers to keep on exploiting us all.
Delivered more oil deals? Unless you agree to a rapid transition away from fossil fuels to energy reduction and renewables, and ending industrial animal agriculture, deforestation, fishing, then no, you did not deliver. And back on your private jets you all go.
You messed it all up. You only delivered a death certificate for all us young people.
No, so far you just talked like you always do at COP. Now it is time to really act. Do not disappoint us again.
COP28 once again did not deliver. False advertising once again.
Global warming and nature loss are among the most severe risks we face in 2024, says the World Economic Forum. The organization released its annual global risks report in mid-January, and this one details extreme weather events and natural resource shortages as the planet's greatest concerns over the next decade. The report indeed falls in line with other warnings by climate scientists. The World Wildlife Fund, for instance, says unless we take urgent action, climate threats will only intensify and push us closer to causing irreversible damage to society and ecosystems. Things were never meant to get this bad. The Kunming-Montreal Biodiversity Framework was adopted in 2022. Governments had agreed to commit resources to avoid irreparable harm to nature and position it on the path to recovery. But 1 year on, the Global Risks Report said the pace and scale of action are failing to match the promise of the agreement. The report also emphasized the importance of the 2015 Paris Agreement goal to keep global temperatures well below 2 degrees Celsius. The WEF cautioned that greenhouse gas emissions must peak before 2025 and decline by more than 40% by the end of the decade. Meanwhile, global carbon emissions exceeded 40 billion tons in 2023. And in 2015, UN member states adopted the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development with 17 goals at the heart of it. The report says despite progress in some areas, half the targets show moderate or severe deviation from the desired trajectory. The authors suggest the business community must play a crucial role in reducing their negative impacts on the environment. I spoke with Stephen Cornelius, the World Wildlife Fund's Deputy Global Climate and Energy Lead.
The World Economic Forum's 10-year outlook suggests climate threats dominate the list of risks people will face. Top of that list are extreme weather events. Does the World Wildlife Fund see any push to address global preparedness and resilience on that particular issue?
Yeah, this is the 19th year that this risk report has been prepared by the World Economic Forum. And over the past few years, environmental risks have dominated. They've been the top 1, 2, 3, 4 risks that have been highlighted. So this is not something new. And climate change related risks, nature loss related risks are always right up at the top of the list. Last year we saw it was the hottest in human history. We saw extreme events all over the world because of this. So no part of the world is untouched by the impacts of climate change. And that's cyclones in Madagascar, heat waves, fires across the Mediterranean. So people all over the world have experienced this. How do we deal with it? To reduce the amounts of losses and damages we've seen, 2 things have to happen. So mitigation first is about cutting emissions. It's stopping climate change getting worse. The best way to do that is to get out of fossil fuels, stop burning coal, oil and gas for energy. Secondly is the adaptation, the preparedness, the resilience, the stuff that you're talking about. So how do we increase resilience? We need to invest. We need to invest in nature-based solutions, protecting our coral reefs, protecting and restoring mangroves, things that will help us improve resilience for people and nature around the world. And so to do that, we need money. And we are asking for, governments need to provide at least 50% of the finance that's being provided needs to go towards this preparedness, this adaptation. And that's something that we'll be focusing on, pushing for the next year around our work on climate change and our work particularly related to COP29 in Azerbaijan.
We know governments are still working out the finances when it comes to mitigation and adaptation, resilience, etc. But we know out of COP28 that oil and gas companies will be pushing ahead with exploration, production. Does that mean that these predictions by the WEF are set in stone at this point?
I think if you look at the risks again over the last few years, they do fluctuate. And the short-term ones particularly change quite a bit, but the longer-term ones, as I said, they are, it's environmental ones that are highlighted. And it's investments now. We are on a path, and that path can be changed by investment. So the choices that we have in terms of, do we invest in more oil and gas? Do we instead transition away from fossil fuels, as was agreed at COP28 in Dubai just recently? And so investments, choices that governments make now will impact us in the long term.
We know much of the planet's plants and animals can help us fight climate change, but not everyone agrees that biodiversity loss and ecosystem collapse are serious issues. How do you go about convincing people that these are worth protecting?
WWF is the biggest conservation organization globally, and we've got millions of supporters, and we've got local communities that we work with that don't need convincing. So they are already convinced that nature is worth saving. And it's things like we show scientific evidence, we show that there's economic value, that livelihoods need sustainable natural environment. We highlight that nature is good for well-being. So there's benefits from protecting nature, protecting biodiversity. So nature slows global warming. It absorbs carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. It holds carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere, carbon out of the atmosphere. And so if we can keep healthy ecosystems and healthy ecosystems help keep communities safe from impacts. So the example of a coral reef, it protects against storm surges. Mangroves, storm surges and stop erosion. So these things, the benefits, if we can show the benefits and highlight the benefits more strongly than maybe we're doing already, I think this is important. So, nature has, by absorbing carbon dioxide, has slowed global warming already, and it helps us protect us from those impacts of warmer weather, from bigger floods, from wildfires that we've seen previously.
And according to the WEF report, we are, quote, plagued by a duo of dangerous crises, climate and conflict. Can we effectively tackle global warming with the current ongoing wars, not only dominating media attention, but also affecting some governments' response to oil and gas shortages?
It's understandable that attention is focused on the immediate humanitarian situations, but our leaders can't lose sight of the need to tackle these longer term challenges such as biodiversity loss and climate change. And as I've said, that they're two sides of the same coin and they need to be addressed together. And if we don't tackle them, then the impacts will just get more severe. We know that. We've seen the evidence historically. Last year was the warmest on record, nearly 1.5 degrees above pre-industrial levels. And every region faced devastating weather-related disasters because of these higher temperatures. And so, this is the sort of thing that needs to focus our leaders' minds. Recent conflicts have had impacts on global energy markets. The cost of fossil fuels has risen. And so if governments respond by doubling down on coal, on oil, on gas, that's not going to help. We've seen that has the countries that are high fossil fuel amounts in their energy systems have been worse affected by these global energy prices. And so the transition away from fossil fuels agreed at COP28 is important. So moving towards renewables, improving energy efficiency so we use less energy is, that's the focus. And the choices that we make now and the way that the governments respond now will determine whether we succeed or fail in this.
The oil and gas industry continues to make record profits in the face of growing international calls to transition away from fossil fuels. Big surprise. The critics say energy firms pledge to reduce emissions for political purposes, only to abandon them when they no longer suited their interests. A report by the United Nations says without more stringent action to cut emissions, we won't be able to avert the worst effects of climate change.
As greenhouse gas emissions hit new highs, so too do temperature records, all part of the intensifying effects of climate change. 7 of the world's major oil companies collectively accumulated more than $60 billion in financial gain during the third quarter of 2023. It follows record-breaking profits in the first quarter and only a slight dip in the second, despite global price fluctuations. Saudi Aramco's profits alone exceeded the GDP of 78 countries, while ExxonMobil reported $9.1 billion in profits, more than the GDP of 40 countries. Its CEO says technology advances could double its oil output to produce up to 1 million barrels per day by 2027. And Shell announced it will not increase investments in renewable energy despite promises to dramatically slash emissions.
The whole transition is, it will be probably one of the hardest technical and geopolitical things we've had to achieve.
Experts say pledges to cut emissions mean little if polluting industries continue to increase their fossil fuel output.
Governments can't keep pledging to cut emissions under the Paris Agreement and then greenlighting huge fossil fuel projects. This is throwing the global energy transition and humanity's future into question.
Meanwhile, the UN released an emissions gap report in November, sounding the alarm that the Earth is speeding towards between 2.5 to 2.9 degrees Celsius of global warming compared to pre-industrial times. Those figures well in excess of the agreed-upon international threshold of 1.5 degrees.
1.5 is absolutely dead. I mean, there is not going to be a 1.5.
Researchers say 2023 was a record-breaking one for CO2 emissions, with around 41 billion tons released.
In short, the report shows that the emissions gap is more like an emissions canyon. A canyon littered with broken promises, broken lives, and broken records. All of this is a failure of leadership, a betrayal of the vulnerable, and a massive missed opportunity.
While countries including France, Germany, the UK, the US, Japan, and Brazil have decreased emissions, it's only been an increment of 1 to 2% in the best of cases. Scientists say this has to accelerate.
You're not making deep enough and broad enough cuts in global carbon emissions to really put us on a track that really allows us to tackle climate change. The growing emissions year on year are responsible for climate change, and as long as they're not brought down to zero, then the warming is going to continue.
The report notes carbon emissions from burning of coal, oil, and gas rose 1.2% last year. The COP28 agreement includes tripling of renewable energy capacity and transitioning away from fossil fuels.
We need a financial incentive, we need a mechanism, but I don't see these companies investing in renewable technology without some kind of mandate or legal position, or if by some breakthrough we make renewables cheaper to build, but I don't see that happening anytime soon. There's no technology just on the horizon.
Instead, energy firms have made record profits by increasing production of oil and gas, a far cry from their promises of rolling back emissions and investing in renewables.
So the fight against climate change is naturally about keeping things the way they are in our environment, being sustainable, carbon neutral, eco-friendly, even being green, all follow this mission. But the climate crisis is already upon us, and as change becomes inevitable, facing the effects has gone beyond stopping global warming to surviving.
Out of the frying pan into the fire. Despite decades of warnings, the world has warmed. Weather disasters are common because we failed to prevent them. As people struggle to steer clear of an even worse fate, keeping communities safe warrants a new approach. That approach is climate resilience. The global damages wrought by extreme weather are astronomical. The World Economic Forum says it costs $16 million every hour. Even if global warming is stopped, a certain amount of temperature and sea level rise, as well as weather change, is locked in. Building up climate resilience makes it cheaper and easier to preserve communities. But what does resilience look like? There are three main aspects: preparation, adaptation, and recovery. Preparation means new construction that can withstand the inevitable, like seawalls and levees to protect from hurricanes. It also means weather warning systems, evacuation, and shelter plans everyone can understand to save more lives. Adaptation is about adjusting what already exists: storm shutters, elevation, and fireproofing current infrastructure. Other examples include restoring wetlands, growing crops that can handle heat and drought, and upgrading zoning laws and building codes to guide where and how structures can be built. And finally, recovery means quickly assessing damage, involving insurance companies or government aid, and initiating repairs. Clearing roads so food and water can be distributed after a disaster. The faster businesses and schools can reopen, the better for an economy. And there's so much more. But just like preventing the climate crisis, Adjusting to it is difficult and expensive. It's a community effort that relies on every aspect of society to work together.
The Nakivale settlement has been a haven for refugees of conflicts from all over East Africa, but the rapidly growing community is putting pressure on natural resources by felling trees. Now, a group of residents have taken matters into their own hands, turning the hillsides into lush vegetation once more.
The Nakivale refugee settlement in Uganda is home to more than 180,000 people who have fled from the DRC, Burundi, Somalia, Rwanda, Ethiopia, and Eritrea. The area, nearly 200 square miles in size, was once covered with trees. But the need for building materials, fuel, and farmland has stripped much of the area bare.
We have increased influx of refugees from DRC. Majority of the refugees are from DRC, and each day and night we receive new arrivals. So when they come, there's a need for construction, and construction, it requires building materials. So even the few trees available, they are cut down to construct trees.
It is also the refugees that worked together on a solution to the problem. From Burundi, Enoch Twagirayesu came up with the idea.
twagira ngo tubyare imiti ubwo twija kunoya ebicweka bya kunoya na kivale byona birebyinemo abira ari kibira konka ubwire bwo twamaramwo imyaka mushanju.
Twagirayesu says their effort is born out of concern for a better environment. But the double whammy of human activity and climate change has made it difficult to achieve their dream of reforesting Nakivale. Despite having planted more than 460,000 trees, there's still much work to be done.
At least nitubasa kuba twine half ya program yitu yo kugira ngo dushike ha target. Emyanya yo iriho habo kuba nkanema beret okureba Nakivale yona twagitorora nemiti n'ahantu hahanga umunonga.
Gorillas, chimpanzees, orangutans, and us are all that remain of several dozen species of great apes which were found in Africa, Europe, and Asia between 2 and 22 million years ago. The scientists in China are now studying the largest great ape in recorded history, called Gigantopithecus blacki. It stood more than 3 meters tall and weighed about 300 kilos. And researchers say the primate's size may have been its downfall.
它个子这么大，理论上讲应该更强大，应该有更强的能力去应付大自然的选择，但事实上不是这样子。这其中的原因是什么？这个呢，就是我们驱动我们本研究的最根本的科学问题。那么等到过渡期70万年前开始的时候，由于季节性的增强，导致植物群落发生变化，森林的植物组成发生变化，森林变得更加开放，木本植物变少，蕨类的植物增加，导致布氏巨猿原来所偏好的那些食物减少了，布氏巨猿不得不依赖更多的低营养价值的备选食物，纤维质的备选食物来维持其生存。偏偏在这个时候，在这个过程当中，
A new documentary film featuring a handful of Hollywood's biggest stars is out. Common Ground, as it's called, shares the stories of people at the front of the agricultural movement aiming to heal eroded soil. It also examines what regenerative farming is and how it could help solve global warming.
I forgot my suit. I feel like I'm underdressed. But if you are the people who can make a change, well, it's high time to finally get regenerative agriculture. Let's prioritize the farmer.
Big names like Jason Momoa is part of the film. He's best known for his roles as Aquaman and in the HBO series Game of Thrones. A-listers Demi Moore, Laura Dern, Donald Glover, Ian Somerhalder and Woody Harrelson are also in Common Ground, which premiered in Los Angeles on January 11th.
I'm such a nerd where I really love this kind of stuff, so I'm kind of, it's sad because it's something that it's nothing new, you know. Many indigenous tribes have been doing this forever.
I think that this film brings forward the gift of solution in such a simple way. While I think that there are complexities to creating the change that's needed, I think you really walk away uplifted with the knowing that this has an opportunity to not only enhance our lives as individuals, but also the planet.
And that's our show, but before I leave you, here are more images of the flooding in the Democratic Republic of Congo, which happened after the Congo River swelled to near record levels and burst its banks. 15 million people live in one of the most affected areas. Residents said dark, foul-smelling water poured into their homes.